on the morning of August 24th, 79 CE. Romans woke up in a prosperous city beneath a mountain they thought was a friend. By sunset the next day, they were buried under 20 feet of ash, and their city would vanish from history for nearly 1,700 years. When archaeologists finally found them, they made a chilling discovery. In the ash were not stone. They were voids, hollow spaces left where bodies had decomposed. Filled those voids with plaster, they unearthed the exact postures of the dead, a mother shielding her child. A slave still in chains, twisting in agony at the end of its leash, is the story of Pompeii, a city that was destroyed so completely that its destruction preserved it. Truly grasp the magnitude of this loss, we must first journey back to a time when Pompeii was alive and wealthy Roman city buzzing with activity. A place where the air smelled of baking bread and fermenting fish sauce, where the streets echoed with the cries of merchants and the laughter of children, where grand buildings gleamed under the Mediterranean sun. Was Pompeii, before the fire, a metropolis frozen in time by one of history's deadliest disasters? Our story begins not with the eruption. City itself, a thriving community built on ancient foundations. Pompeii was founded by the Azcans around the 8th century before the Common Era, on a volcanic plateau overlooking the Bay of Naples. This location was no accident. Soil enriched by centuries of volcanic activity promised abundant harvests. Harbor offered access to lucrative trade routes across the Mediterranean. Pompeii grew and changed hands, influenced by the Etruscans and the Greeks, each leaving their mark on its culture and architecture. 9 before the Common Era, the Roman general Lucius Cornelius Sulla laid siege to the city, and after a bitter conflict, Pompeii was conquered and absorbed into the Roman Republic, transformed Pompeii into a Roman colony, described in detail by the historian Mary Beard in her book The Fires of Vesuvius. Roman law, Roman customs, and Roman engineering began to reshape the city, yet it retained a unique character, pot of cultures that made it extraordinarily vibrant. Walk through its gates in the 1st century of the Common Era, and you would hear a babble of languages, not just Latin, but Greek from traders, from old families, and even traces of Etruscan in religious rituals. The population was a mix of Romans who came for opportunity, freed slaves who built new lives, and local Samnites who maintained their traditions. Diversity was the city's strength, fueling a dynamic economy that made Pompeii remarkably prosperous. The economy of Pompeii was built on 4 pillars, each leaving behind tangible evidence for archaeologists to uncover. Was wine, with vineyards stretching across the slopes of Vesuvius, producing a famous vintage known as Vesuvius, as far as Gaul and Spain. Was olive oil, pressed in large stone mills found in ruins like the House of the Faun. Pits and press beds tell a story of industrial scale production. Was gar, a fermented fish sauce that was the Roman equivalent of ketchup, a pungent condiment made in factories along the shore. Aroma permeating the city. And the 4th was wool, with fulleries, or cleaning workshops where urine was used to treat fabrics. So common that jars were placed on street corners for collection. Industries created wealth that was visible everywhere, from the grand public buildings to the luxurious private homes. What did daily life look like for the 20,000 souls who called Pompeii home? Step into the Forum, the heart of the city, a sprawling plaza surrounded by temples, markets, and government buildings. Under the shadow of the temple of Jupiter, politicians campaigned, businessmen struck deals, and citizens gathered to hear news. The walls of the Forum were covered in election graffiti, slogans painted in red ochre that shouted support for local candidates, Marcus Holco Cneius Rufus, or the wealthy matron Julia Felix. Graffiti preserved under ash offer a direct voice from the past, a snapshot of democratic fervor in a Roman town. One inscription reads, "I ask you to elect Gaius Julius Paul Ibius as do vir, he brings good bread." This was a city where even bakers had political clout, and every vote mattered. And this is only the beginning of the stories hidden in Pompeii's stones. From the Forum, a short walk would take you to the amphitheater, a massive oval structure that could hold 20,000 spectators, the entire population of the city. Built around 70 before the Common Era, it is the oldest surviving Roman amphitheater in the world, a testament to Pompeii's love for spectacle. The roar of the crowd as gladiators fought in the arena, the smell of sweat and sand, the thrill of blood sport that united rich and poor. The amphitheater was not just for entertainment, it was a social glue, a place where the community came together, but also where tensions simmered, as recorded by the historian Tacitus, who noted a riot between Pompeians and visitors from New Syria that left many dead. Hinted at the underlying conflicts in a bustling city, a reminder that peace was fragile, where it gets worse, because beyond the grandeur, Pompeii was a city of contrasts where luxury and squalor existed side by side. For every wealthy patrician in a villa with mosaic floors and frescoed walls, there were slaves living in cramped quarters, found by archaeologists in the barracks near the theater, offered respite with sophisticated high-power cost systems, underfloor heating that circulated hot air from furnaces, allowing citizens to socialize in steamy rooms adorned with sculptures. The Stabian baths, for example, had separate sections for men and women, with cold plunge pools and hot caldariums, a marvel of engineering that required constant maintenance by slaves. Around the corner, in the side streets, were the lupanars or brothels, small rooms with stone beds and erotic paintings on the walls, a clientele of sailors, merchants, and locals. Every corner, like the thermopolium of Selina, where counters held dolia jars for food and wine, on the walls boasted of drinking exploits. Had stone mills turned by donkeys, their skeletons found still hitched to the equipment, and ovens that produced loaves of bread, some carbonized and preserved, showing bakers' stamps with names like Modestus. These everyday scenes paint a picture of a city that was relentlessly alive, a noisy, smelly, vibrant place where people worked, loved, and dreamed. But what about the people themselves? Who were they? Archaeologists have pieced together biographies from tombstones, legal tablets, wax tablets found in the house of the banking Vesuvius. Of Umbrai Scoras, a magnate whose home was filled with mosaics of fish sauce amphorae, advertising his wealth. We know of the priestess Eumarchia, who funded a building in the Forum for the cloth merchants, her statue standing proudly in a niche. We know the gladiator Kel Ardus, whose graffiti proclaims, "The girls sigh for Kel Ardus the Thracian," a boast of celebrity status. of ordinary families, like the one in the house of the tragic poet, where a mosaic of a chained dog warns Cave Canem, beware of the dog, a simple message from a homeowner. And faces make the past feel immediate, but they also raise a question: why did so many people choose to live in the shadow of a volcano? Answer lies in the very fertility that Vesuvius provided, a bounty that made risks seem worth taking. For generations, the mountain had been quiet, its slopes covered in vineyards and villas, a benign presence that locals called Mons Vesuvius, to be an extinct giant. Were warnings, subtle signs that something was amiss? In 60, two of the Common Era, a massive earthquake struck Pompeii, damaging buildings and causing panic, as recorded by the philosopher Seneca in his Natural Questions, were still underway 17 years later, with scaffolding found in ruins, a testament to ongoing construction. This earthquake was a precursor, a tremor from the deep earth that hinted at the mountain's true nature. But life went on. Pompeii was a city on the rise, a place of opportunity and growth. Remember that date, 62, because it comes back later in the worst possible way. As we explore these streets, we must also listen to the scholars who have dedicated their lives to understanding Pompeii. Archaeologists like Giuseppe Fiorelli, who in the 1860s developed the plaster cast technique that revealed the victims, or modern researchers like Stephen Ellis, who directed excavations at the Porta Stabia Gate, uncovering layers of urban development. Their work, published in journals like the American Journal of Archaeology, Pompeii was not a static museum piece, but an evolving urban center, with buildings modified, streets repaved, and neighborhoods shifting. A study from the University of Cincinnati revealed that Pompeii had a complex water system, with lead pipes feeding fountains and baths, but also contamination from lead that may have affected health. Details matter because they humanize the past, turning ash and stone into stories of real people. But amidst this prosperity, there were whispers from the mountain, ignored by most. Harald der Sigurd's son, in his book The Natural History of Vesuvius, points out that the volcano had erupted before, blast around 1800 before the Common Era, but memory fades, and by 79, Vesuvius was considered a fertile hill, not a threat. Even had a god of fire, Vulcan, but they did not connect him to their local mountain, a fatal oversight. Yet the signs were there, had looked closely. Near Pompeii sometimes ran hot, the ground emitted sulfurous gases, and earthquakes, like the one in 62, became more frequent, was too good, too busy to worry about such things. The city thrived with new villas built on the slopes, like the Villa of the Mysteries, with its breathtaking frescoes of initiation rites, a symbol of the cultural sophistication that Pompeii had achieved. And this is only the beginning of the puzzle, because as we peel back the layers, we find more questions than answers. What were the religious beliefs that comforted the Pompeians, with temples to Isis, Apollo, and Venus, the city's patron goddess? How did the legal system work, with courts in the basilica settling disputes over trade and property? What secrets lie in the hundreds of scrolls carbonized in the Villa of the Papyri, waiting for technology to read them without destroying them? Open loops dangle before us, inviting deeper exploration, but time is running out for Pompeii because in 79, finally woke up. As the sun set on a typical day, with taverns filling, baths closing, and families gathering for dinner, no one could have known that their world was about to end. Very prosperity that defined Pompeii, built on the rich soil of Vesuvius, would become its tomb. But what happened next would shock even the people who planned it. A cataclysm so vast it would echo through history. We leave Pompeii as it was, a city frozen in time, on the brink of oblivion, waiting for the fire to fall. The city waited, unaware that the mountain had been sending signals for years, signals that were misunderstood, ignored, simply not recognized for what they were. Is the story of the warning signs everyone ignored, a tale of human arrogance set against the slow, gathering fury of the earth. Pompeii in the years leading up to the catastrophe, a city still healing from a massive earthquake that struck 17 years earlier. 2 CE, a powerful quake rocked the Bay of Naples, causing widespread damage in both Pompeii and Herculaneum. Seneca the Younger, the philosopher and statesman, wrote about this event, describing how buildings collapsed, statues toppled, and panic gripped the population. Was so severe that it damaged the grand temple of Jupiter in the Forum, cracked walls of luxurious villas, and even altered the course, springs. Repairs were slow and painstaking, with scaffolding still visible on many structures decades later. Should have been a stark reminder of the region's instability, but for the Pompeians, it was just another hardship to overcome, with determination reinforcing columns and patching frescoes, believing they had weathered the worst. But here is where it gets worse, because the earth was only resting, gathering strength for a far more deadly blow. Only the beginning of the warnings that would cascade in the days before the eruption. In the early days of August, in 79 CE, smaller tremors began to rattle the city once more. The violent jolts of 62, but a constant, unsettling shudder, like a beast steering in its sleep. Once provided cool, clear water suddenly ran dry or turned brackish. A strange, sulphurous smell hung in the air, reminiscent of rotten eggs, seeping from the ground and lingering in the humid summer heat. Often more attuned to nature's whispers, behaved oddly. Dogs barked incessantly without cause. Birds fled the area, became agitated in their pens. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder would later note such phenomena in his works, though he did not live to see them fulfilled at Vesuvius. Did no one connect these dots? The answer lies in a profound ignorance, a gap in understanding that would cost thousands their lives. Pompeii did not know that Mount Vesuvius was a volcano. It was simply a fertile mountain, its slopes lush with vineyards and olive groves, a benevolent giant that had always provided. That made the region so prosperous was volcanic ash rich in minerals, but that truth was lost to history. Remember this fact comes back later in the worst possible way. The Roman world had no concept of volcanoes as we understand them today. Pantheon of gods included deities for almost every aspect of life, from Neptune for the sea to Vulcan for fire and metalworking. No god of volcanoes was associated with forge fires and craftsmanship, not with mountainous eruptions. In their mythology, meant they had no framework to interpret the signs. When the ground shook on the gods' displeasure or simple geological whims, not on a slumbering fire mountain. Archaeologists like Professor Mary Beard have pointed out that the Romans saw disasters as portents or divine messages, predictable natural events. As the tremors increased, many Pompeians likely offered sacrifices at temples, seeking favor from the gods, simply went about their daily business, trusting in the resilience of their city. The stunning arrogance of Roman engineering, with its aqueducts and roads, fostered a belief that they could conquer any challenge. But what if the challenge was something they could not even name? This question hangs in the air, an open loop that we will return to as the disaster unfolds. Zoom in on the days just before the eruption. Imagine a typical August day with the sun beating down on the cobbled streets. Shopkeepers in the Via dell'Abbondanza sold their wares. Children played near the public fountains, now trickling weakly. In the vineyards on Vesuvius's slopes, workers tended to grapes under a hazy sky. The sulfur smell was strong enough that some commented on it, perhaps wrinkling their noses in distaste. But it was dismissed as a passing nuisance. Countryside, springs that had flowed for generations, suddenly ceased, leaving farmers puzzled and concerned. Historical records from Pliny the Younger, who witnessed the eruption from a distance, described these precursors in his letters to the historian Tacitus, of earthquakes being so common in Campania that people grew accustomed to them, hardly giving them a second thought. This normalization of danger is a haunting theme, a human tendency to ignore the tremors until the ground splits open. Amidst this ignorance, there were clues that pointed to a deeper truth. Geologists today, studying the layers of ash, that seismic activity increased in the years leading up to 79, with gas emissions altering the water table. But for the Pompeians, these were mysteries without answers, puzzles they lacked the pieces to solve. The ongoing repairs from the 62 earthquake, a project that spanned decades. The Forum still had damaged sections. The House of the Faun bore cracks, hastily plastered over. Wealthy patrons like the banker Lucius Caecilius Eucundus, whose records were found in his house, invested in rebuilding. The work was uneven. Some parts of the city gleamed with new frescoes, while others languished in disrepair. Patchy recovery speaks to a community living on borrowed time, prioritizing commerce and comfort over existential threat. When the smaller tremors hit in 79, many might have sighed, thinking of yet more repairs, not of evacuation. The local officials, the duumviri, focused on maintaining order and collecting taxes, not on disaster preparedness. No plan, no protocol for fleeing the mountain, because in their minds, the mountain was not a threat. It was their benefactor, source of their wealth. But here is where it gets worse, because the very prosperity that blinded them would soon entomb them. Only the beginning of the irony that defines this tragedy. Animals, as mentioned, provided some of the clearest warnings. Known for their keen senses, were reported to have howled relentlessly in the nights before the eruption. Particularly swallows and sparrows were observed fleeing the area in large flocks, a phenomenon noted in ancient texts on natural omens. Even rodents seemed to abandon their nests, scurrying away from the city. Scientists explain this through changes in electromagnetic fields or gas emissions that animals can detect. But for the Romans, strange behavior, perhaps an omen to be interpreted by augurs. Priests who read signs from the gods might have seen these as bad portents. but their warnings were likely vague in the noise of daily life. A farmer seeing his sheep refuse to graze near the mountain slopes, or a fisherman noticing dead fish floating in the bay, warmed by subterranean heat. Yet no one could piece together the puzzle. Why? Because the puzzle itself was unknown. The mountain had been dormant for centuries, long enough that all memory of its volcanic nature had faded from human knowledge. Vesuvius's last major eruption was around 1800 BCE, an event lost to myth and time. So when it reawakened, in a world utterly unprepared, in memory, because it is a chilling lesson in how comfort breeds complacency. As the days ticked by, the signs grew more frequent. The sulfur smell intensified, permeating homes and taverns, making the air thick and unpleasant to breathe. Some wells not only dried up but emitted warm vapors, a detail corroborated by archaeological studies of water channels in Pompeii. People might have joked about the stench or blamed it on nearby industrial activities, like the fulleries where urine was used to clean clothes. But beneath their feet, magma was rising, gases were building, and the mountain's plumbing system was undergoing catastrophic changes. Modern volcanologists, like Professor Harald der Sigurd's son, who has analyzed the eruption sequences, shows that these were classic precursors to a Plinian eruption. For the Romans, it was just another oddity in a world full of mysteries. They had no seismometers, no gas detectors, only their senses and their beliefs. Beliefs told them that the gods controlled nature, so if disaster came, it was divine will. This fatalism, combined with ignorance, a perfect storm of inaction. But what happened next would shock even the people who planned it. A cataclysm so vast it would echo through history. We are left wondering, how many chances did they have to flee? This open-loop dangles a question of human resilience versus nature's fury, the cultural context. The Romans were masters of empire, conquerors of lands and seas, but their science was limited. They observed nature meticulously, in the works of Pliny, the elder's natural history, but they lacked the theory to explain volcanoes. Even the word volcano comes from Vulcan, but it was not used for mountains until after this eruption. Vesuvius grumbled they saw it as a fertile hill, not a ticking time bomb. Vineyards covered its slopes. Famous wines like the Pompeii are celebrated across the empire. Villas dotted the countryside with panoramic views of the bay, their owners blissfully unaware of the danger. Is palpable in the archaeological record, where luxury items and lavish decorations show a society focused on pleasure and status. Of growing unease, why did so few leave? Some might have, the wealthy with properties elsewhere, but for the majority, Pompeii was home, livelihoods tied to the land. Losing everything, a risk too great for vague threats. And so they stayed, trusting in the mountain that had always provided. Was not done. It had one more card to play, a final warning that would come too late. On the eve of the eruption, the tremors became almost constant, a low rumble that vibrated through the stone floors of baths and homes. The sulfur smell was now overpowering, and the sky held a peculiar haze, even as the weather seemed fair. Some residents might have felt a deep unease, a primal fear they could not name. Life went on. Taverns like the one owned by Arcelina filled with patrons, baths like the Stabian baths closed for the day. Families gather for evening meals, unaware that this would be their last supper. The local gladiator barracks, housing fighters like Kel Ardus the Thracian, buzzed with activity, training for upcoming games. Of Isis, priests performed rituals, perhaps seeking protection from the strange signs. But no one connected these dots to the mountain. Why would they? Vias had been silent for generations, a backdrop to their lives, not an actor. This ignorance is the heart of the tragedy, spot in human knowledge that would be filled with ash and fire. As we ponder these missed signals, we must ask, what would we have done in their place? Open Loop invites us to reflect on our own preparedness for disasters, a theme that resonates through the ages. The stage was set, the warnings ignored, and the city slumbered on. But remember, the mountain had been patient, biding its time for centuries. Its moment had come. The sulfur smell, the dry wells, the trembling earth, all were pieces of a puzzle no one could solve. In the quiet of that August night, as stars glittered over the bay, the first subtle changes began. Of the hell that would soon break loose. Of Pompeii, wrapped in their daily concerns, were about to learn the true nature of their mountain. A lesson written in stone and ash is only the beginning of the end, because what comes next is a fury so immense. It would freeze a city in time. Their ignorance for all eternity is a story for another moment, a descent into chaos that would redefine disaster for the ancient world. The morning of August the 24th, in the year 70, 9 of the Common Era dawned with a serene beauty over the Bay of Naples. The day began with the familiar sounds of commerce and community. Shop awnings were unfurled, water splashed in public fountains, of fresh bread wafted from bakeries. Vesuvius stood silent against the blue sky, a peaceful giant that had slumbered for generations. Tranquility was a cruel illusion. Deep within the earth, magma had been rising, fracturing rock, until it could no longer be contained. By midday, the mountain would unleash a fury that would echo through history. Only the beginning. Our guide through this cataclysm is a teenager named Pliny the Younger, watching from the safe distance, about 18 miles away. To the historian Tacitus, written 2 decades later, provide the only surviving eyewitness account. He describes how, around the first hour after noon, his mother pointed to a strange cloud forming over Vesuvius. He wrote, in the shape of a pine tree with a tall trunk and spreading branches blotched with dark patches of ash, shot upward at incredible speed, reaching an estimated height of 20 miles into the stratosphere. Volcanologists now call this a Pliny-an eruption column, a testament to Pliny's vivid description. What did it mean for those directly beneath it? The answer came with a sound like the world tearing apart. Approximately 1 in the afternoon, Vesuvius exploded. Modern scientists, using seismic data and computer models, calculate that the energy released was equivalent to 100,000 Hiroshima bombs. The force, enough to reshape a mountain and darken the sky for miles around. Blast sent a column of superheated gas ash and pumice soaring upward. Then, as the column reached the cooler upper atmosphere under its own weight, beginning the deadly rainfall of volcanic material. 18 hours, Pompeii was subjected to a relentless downpour of ash and pumice stones. The first flakes of ash were almost gentle, a grey dust settling on rooftops and streets. But within minutes, the pumice began to fall, small stones at first, then larger ones, some the size of apples. Down with enough force to crack skulls and shatter tiles. Once bustling, became treacherous pathways. People rushed to gather their families and valuables, was quickly becoming impossible. The ash accumulated rapidly, at a rate of about 6 inches per hour. After noon, it was already knee-deep, clogging doorways and weighing down roofs. The air grew thick with a choking mix of sulfur dioxide and fine particles, burning eyes and throats. Panic spread as the sky darkened. Into night. Pliny the Younger, the cloud from Vesuvius was so vast that it spread across the sky, blocking the sun. Soon after the eruption began, darkness fell, not like a moonless night, but like being in a closed room with the lights extinguished. This darkness was pierced only by the fiery glow of the volcano and the frequent flashes of lightning. Fall was so heavy that it covered the sea, making it impossible for ships to navigate. Pliny's uncle, Pliny the Elder, commanded the Roman fleet at Misenum and decided to sail toward Vesuvius to investigate and rescue friends. Would become legendary. But it would also cost him his life. To his story. But first, let us focus on those trapped in Pompeii. But here is where it gets worse. While Pompeii was slowly buried under ash, the smaller town of Herculaneum, nestled at the base of Vesuvius, more swift and terrifying fate. Around midnight, the first of 6 pyroclast tick flows descended from the volcano. Slow, moving lava flows, but avalanches of superheated gas, ash, and rock that can travel at speeds up to 400 miles per hour. Within these flows reach an astonishing 400 degrees Celsius, hot enough to instantly incinerate organic matter. Of Herculaneum had perhaps felt safer being closer to the sea, but the flows moved too fast for escape. Excavations led by archaeologists like Giuseppe Mastrolorenzo have revealed that victims were killed by thermal shock in less than a second. Bodies were vaporized, leaving only skeletal remains and voids in the ash that outline their final poses. Remember this detail because it contrasts sharply with what happened in Pompeii. Back in Pompeii, the night was a long descent into hell. Fall continued unabated, and the city was plunged into a darkness so complete that lamps did little to pierce it. Lightning flashed through the ash cloud, creating eerie, strobing illuminations. Some residents tried to flee, but the city gates were blocked by debris and collapsing buildings. Others huddled in their homes, hoping the stone walls would protect them. Weight of the ash, now over 2 meters deep in places, caused roofs to cave in, trapping entire families. Became unbreathable, with oxygen levels dropping as the ash suffocated the city. Imagine the desperation. For help lost in the rumble of the mountain. The accumulation of ash and pumice created a deadly trap. As the hours passed, of the volcanic material caused buildings to collapse. The Forum, once the heart of the city, was buried under meters of debris. Shops and homes were crushed. People sought refuge in cellars and underground rooms, but these became tombs as ash filled every crevice. Archaeologists have found groups of skeletons in such spaces, huddled together as if seeking comfort in their final moments. One famous cast from the Garden of the Fugitives shows 13 individuals, including children. caught in the open as they tried to flee, tell a story of sudden, overwhelming death. As the night wore on, a new danger emerged. Accumulation of hot ash and pumice began to generate heat, cooking the city from above. In the ash layer rose, making it unbearable for those trapped. Then, as dawn approached on August the 25th, delivered its final blow. Class tick surge, a low-density cloud of even hotter gas and ash, swept over Pompeii. This surge, exceeding 500 degrees Celsius, moved at incredible speed, engulfing the city in seconds. By thermal shock and asphyxiation, vaporizing soft tissue and flash, baking the bodies, were frozen in their final moments, their poses preserved as hollows in the ash. Archaeologists would later fill these voids with plaster, the haunting casts that show us their agony. The science behind the eruption is equally chilling. Volcanologists like Harald de Sigurd's son have studied the deposits to reconstruct the timeline. They identify multiple phases, starting with the Plinian column, followed by pyroclast tick flows and surges. And final surge that hit Pompeii at dawn on August the 25th was particularly devastating. Speeds of over 100 miles per hour, and contained a mix of gas and ash that penetrated every building. This surge is what created the famous body casts as it enveloped victims and left cavities in the hardened ash. How did these casts survive for centuries? A mystery for the archaeologists, and we will delve into their methods later. The death toll was catastrophic. From historical records and archaeological evidence suggest that between 12 and 16,000 people died in Pompeii, Neum, and the surrounding villages. Lake Neum excavations at the beachfront have revealed over 300 skeletons in boat sheds, where people had gathered hoping for rescue by sea. Together, their bodies carbonized by the intense heat. In Pompeii, the distribution of bodies shows that many were caught in the streets or near the city gates, suggesting a frantic attempt to escape. But some were found in their homes, with valuables like jewelry and coins, indicating they may have stayed behind to protect their possessions. Fear, hope, or sheer disbelief haunt us today. But why did so many perish? Were they unable to flee, or did they choose to stay with their belongings? We will explore these human stories in the next part. And what about Pliny the Elder, who sailed toward Vesuvius to rescue friends? Is a tale of courage and tragedy that we have yet to uncover. Subsided, the region was transformed. Vesuvius had lost its peak, collapsing into a smaller caldera. The Sarno River was diverted, and the coastline extended westward due to volcanic deposits. Pompeii and her Cailloux were erased from living memory, becoming legends among locals. Very ash that destroyed them also preserved them, sealing buildings, artifacts, and even graffiti in a state of suspended animation. This preservation is so complete that we can read wax tablets, see frescoes in vibrant color, and taste the carbonized bread from ovens. Discovery would wait for centuries until a farmer digging a well stumbled upon a wall in the year 1748. And so, sky fell ended with silence. But the story of Pompeii was far from over. In the next part, we will explore how this city was lost and found, and how its rediscovery shook the world. Ashes had settled, but the echoes of that day would reverberate through time. Look closer and remember the lives that were so abruptly ended. Had spoken, but humanity would soon listen, uncovering secrets frozen in time. For over 1,600 years, the city slept. Pompeii lay hidden beneath a hardened blanket of ash and pumice, fading from maps and living memory into local legend. The ground above it was called La Civita, the city, by farmers who sometimes found strange stones in their fields. In the year 1748, a Spanish military engineer named Roquois Quin de Alcubierre was digging a well. Not earth, but ancient masonry. He had, by chance, pierced the roof of a lost world. A gentle awakening. Alcubierre was working for the new king of Naples, Charles of Bourbon. More interested in treasure than history, the early excavations were brutal, a kind of licensed looting. Tunnels were driven through buildings, beautiful frescoes were hacked from walls to be sold, and statues were hauled away to decorate royal palaces. Of these objects, the stories they told together was destroyed. For decades, the dig was a race for beautiful artifacts, of a grave. But even in this chaos, the power of the place was undeniable. Workers would whisper of feeling watched, of the uncanny sensation that life had just been extinguished. And they were right. The city was waiting, patient, for someone to learn how to listen. But here is where it gets worse. Hunters missed the most profound evidence. Of all, because they did not yet know how to see it. Walked right over the hollow spaces in the ash, spaces that held the true heart of the tragedy. It would take a man of both science and imagination to hear the silence these voids contained. As Giuseppe Fiorilli, appointed director of excavations in 1863, Fiorilli was a revolutionary. The random tunneling and imposed a systematic approach, excavating the city from the top down, street by street, building by building. That the value of Pompeii was not just in its gold and marble, but in its ordinary moments. In 1863, he had a revelation. His workers kept finding strange cavities in the volcanic material that contained bits of bone and remnants of fabric. O'Reilly realized these were the spaces left by bodies that had decomposed, leaving a perfect imprint in the hardened ash. A daring technique. His team to carefully pierce a small hole into one of these cavities and pour in liquid plaster of Paris. Once the plaster set, the surrounding ash and pumice were chipped away. Was not a skeleton, but a sculpture of a person in the exact posture of their death. It was a moment of resurrection, and direct. Was of a man forever captured in a futile attempt to shield his face. With this single act, O'Reilly transformed archaeology from a study of objects into a study of people. The victims back their form, their agony, their humanity. And this is only the beginning, are not statues. They are death masks of an entire population, a three-dimensional negative of a final breath, known as the mother and child. She is curled on her side, her arm drawn up, her face a mask of exhausted surrender. Against her stomach is the smaller form of her child. Did she try to outrun the Pyro-class tick surge, only to be overcome in a sheltered corner? The folds of her tunic, the delicate bones of her fingers. Another cast shows a dog, twisted in a violent contortion, still chained to a post in the house of Orpheus. Animal had climbed the ash as it fell, the level rising around it until the chain snapped taut, and it suffocated. Its final struggle is frozen in plaster for eternity. The most famous of all is the two maidens, long thought to be a couple, embracing. Modern CT scans have revealed they are likely two young men, or possibly a master and a slave, huddled together as the heat took them. Are so close they seem to have merged into one form of shared terror. Then there is the pregnant slave, found in the gladiator barracks, still bearing the marks of shackles. Behind, or chose to stay when others fled. Her story is a silent scream against the brutal hierarchies of the ancient world. Tells a story that written history ignores. These are not emperors or generals. Shopkeepers, slaves, children, they are us. But what about the stories they chose to tell about themselves in their own words, on their own walls? We will return to that question. Answer reveals a city bursting with life, not just death. Remember that question as we step into their homes. For the plaster casts are just the most visceral shock. Miracle of Pompeii is the sheer, overwhelming normality preserved everywhere you look. Walk down a street and you see stepping stones to cross when the gutters ran with rain. Ruts worn by cart, wheels over centuries. Look up and you see a bakery with its millstones still in place. Archaeologists found 81 loaves of bread, carbonized but perfectly recognizable, round and scored into 8 sections, a breakfast that never came. The colors are what stun every visitor. Where we imagine classical statues as white marble, Pompeii explodes with color. The frescoes are breathtakingly vivid by the ash from sunlight and moisture. Of the mysteries, a vast red room depicts a young woman being initiated into the cult of Dionysus. The figures are life-sized, filled with emotion from fear to ecstasy. The House of the Veti, playful cupids are painted acting out various trades, from making perfume to selling wine. These are not just decorations. They are windows into the dreams and beliefs of the people who lived here. They wanted beauty, myth, and humor on their walls. Show off their wealth and taste. But then, in the back rooms and in the shadows of the brothel, other frescoes were found, explicit and unashamed, depicting acts that scandalized the Victorian archaeologists who uncovered them. For years were locked away in a secret cabinet in the Naples Museum, accessible only by special permission. The Victorians could not reconcile this openness with their image of noble Stoic Romans. But Pompeii forces us to abandon our prejudices, not present a sanitized, heroic version of history. It presents life in all its messy, passionate, and contradictory glory. Only the beginning of the intimate details. The very walls talk. Is scratched everywhere, over 2,500 examples found so far. It is the social media of the ancient world, and immediate. Fan writes, Keladus the Thracian makes the girls sigh. A traveler scratches on April 19th, I made bread here. I am amazed, O wall, that you have not collapsed and fallen, since you must bear the tedious stupidities of so many writers, poems, shopping lists, and political endorsements. Someone wrote, 2 asses drank here. This is the sound of the city, the chatter of 1,000 conversations preserved in stone. If we listen. But who are these people, really? Forms in plaster and their words on walls. We have their homes and their shops. But what did they believe? What secrets did they keep in their most private spaces? There's a structure in Pompeii that holds a clue, a place that connects the bustling everyday life to something much deeper and more mysterious. We will go there soon because it reveals a spiritual world that the ash also froze in time. Let us consider the scale of the loss. Every object, every cast, every fresco is a piece of a puzzle. Archaeologists are still fitting those pieces together, and sometimes they make a discovery that changes the entire picture. Waxed tablets of the banker Lucius Caecilius Eucundus. Found in his house, these are his business records, the carbonized wax still bearing the stylus marks. We can read his loans, his contracts. We know he financed the wool trade and paid for repairs after the earthquake of '62. He is not a historical figure from a book, with a ledger worrying about his accounts. Or consider the Garden of the Fugitives, where 13 casts were made of a group who tried to flee through a vineyard. A family unit of adults and children, their postures showing a slow asphyxiation. They were found with their most precious possessions, keys and coins, still clutched in their hands. Artifacts. They are emergencies that never ended. But the story of Pompeii's rebirth is also a story of modern technology. The plaster cast technique was just the start. Archaeologists use CT scans on the old casts to study the skeletons inside, revealing age, health, and even cause of death with new precision. Laser scanning to map the entire city in 3 dimensions. They analyze soil chemistry to determine what food was grown in gardens. They study doorways to understand traffic patterns. Technological leap, the silent city whispers a little louder. And yet, for all we have learned, one enormous question remains. We have met these people in their final terrible moments. We have walked their streets and read their graffiti. Not yet asked the most important question of all. What did they leave behind for us? Artifacts, but a legacy. What does Pompeii, a city frozen in a single day, tell us about our own world, the nature of civilization and the fragility of life? Will bring us to the final chapter of this story, a chapter that is still being written. Because Pompeii is not just a relic. And as we look into the plaster faces of the dead, we are also looking at ourselves, at what we build, what we value, and what we might leave behind when our own hour comes. Was reborn from the ash to ask us this. And the answer is not carved in stone, in the choices we make every day. But before we confront that legacy, we must complete the journey through the city. One last building, a place that held the deepest fears and highest hopes of every Pompeian. Place would reveal that even in the face of utter annihilation, the human spirit sought meaning, sought to connect with something greater than the mountain's fury. And the final terrible beauty of Pompeii lie ahead. And so we arrive at that final building, a place of refuge that became a tomb, a grand temple or a public bath, but a modest room in a villa on the outskirts of the city, in a place called Civita Juliana. In the year 2020, archaeologists made a discovery so intimate it felt like a violation. Preserved skeletons of 2 men lay side by side, as if placed with care. One was older, perhaps 40 or 45, showing the signs of a life of comfort and good food. was younger, maybe 18 or 23, his spine marked by the repetitive labor of a slave. They were found in what is called a cryptoporticus, a subterranean corridor, and they were not running. They were waiting. The older man, likely the master, had turned his head toward the younger, his hand resting near the other's shoulder. That might have been reassurance or a final command. Taken shelter from the falling ash, and there they remained for almost 2,000 years in a silent, ritual pose of shared fate. Was not just another set of remains. It was a frozen moment of human relationship, of power and dependency, caught in the very act of facing the end. Discovery was only the beginning of a new era of revelations at Pompeii. The city is not done speaking to us. The villa at Civita Giulia Na has become one of the most productive sites in modern archaeology. Months after finding the two men, the same team, led by archaeologist Massimo Ossana, uncovered something dazzling in a nearby stable. A ceremonial chariot, a palentum used in festivals and weddings. A vehicle for war or farming, but for celebration, adorned with silver and bronze medallions depicting satyrs and nymphs. A symbol of joy and ceremony buried under the same layer that snuffed out life. Room of that same villa, a darker story emerged. A small bakery was found with a low ceiling and no windows. The grinding stones were still in place, and here the skeletons of 3 children were discovered, their bones stunted and deformed by the relentless, breaking work of turning grain into flour, likely as young as 8 or 10 years old. So in one complex, we have the chariot of celebration and the mill of suffering, reminder of the brutal inequalities that underpin the beauty of Roman life. Finds tell us that the story of Pompeii is not one story, but thousands woven together in a tapestry of triumph and terror. We are only now beginning to pull at the threads. But how do we move beyond the bones to the people themselves? What did a Pompeii actually look like? What did they fear in the quiet of the night, not from the mountain, but from within their own bodies? To that question arrived in a laboratory, not a trench. 22, a team of scientists led by Professor Gabriel Scorano of the University of Rome. Tor Vergata achieved the impossible. Extracted and sequenced the entire genome of a man and a woman who died in the house of the craftsman. Preserved in the sealed, anaerobic environment of the ash held pristine D. Enna the man was about 35. Profile showed he was from the Italian peninsula, with ancestry from the Near East. The woman was older, around 50, and her DNA linked her to the island of Sardinia. But the science revealed more than origins. Disease. In the woman's DNA, they found the genetic signature of Mycobacterium tuberculosis, the bacteria that causes tuberculosis. Likely coughing and wasting away long before the volcano erupted. This is a profound shift. And no longer looking at plaster casts of anonymous victims. We are meeting individuals, own genetic histories, and their own private sufferings. The mountain did not kill everyone. It was the final blow for many already living with pain. Window is just opening. Now, let us step back into the vibrant, noisy streets of the city, just hours before the end. The smell of cooking food, the shouts of vendors. 20, in the Regio 5 section of the excavations, archaeologists uncovered a thermopolium, a Roman fast food counter of preservation so complete it seemed the owner had just stepped away. The frescoes on the front counter were bright, depicting a nymph riding a sea, horse, and a chicken. The real treasure was inside the deep terracotta jars set into the counter. The bones of a duck cooked and prepared for a customer. Another held a mixture of snails and fish, a sort of ancient stew, held fava beans, ground into a paste. This was not food for the wealthy in their villas. Of a common laborer, a sailor, or a slave, grabbed quickly between shifts. Here was the everyday diet of Pompeii, in a moment. In the back room, the skeleton of a man, perhaps the shopkeeper or a customer, a pile of rubble where he had been thrown by the force of the pyroclastic surge. This Last Supper tells us that life was not just about grand art and politics. The simple, universal need for a hot meal at the end of a long day. But as we peer into these bowls, we must remember a haunting truth. The very ash that buried this meal also preserved it for us to find. The agent of death became the agent of memory. Paradox leads us to an even greater treasure, one that was not in Pompeii, but in its sister city, Herculaneum. While Pompeii was buried in ash and pumice, Herculaneum was engulfed by a soup-pitted mud flow that carbonized everything in its path, an entire library. Villa known as the Villa of the Papyri, hundreds of Pompeii rust scrolls were burned to brittle, blackened logs. For centuries, considered unreadable, the world's oldest collection of philosophy and literature turned to charcoal. A new question was asked. What if we could see inside without touching them? Unroll them virtually. That question launched a decades-long quest, nological detective story that would involve particle accelerators and artificial intelligence. By computer scientist Brent Seals from the University of Kentucky developed a method using X-ray phase. Contrast tomography, a powerful form of three-dimensional scanning. Trained artificial intelligence to detect the subtle bumps of ink on the chart. Crumpled layers. 23, they succeeded. They digitally unfurled a scroll and began to read. Words were in Greek, and they spoke of pleasure. The author was likely the Epicurean philosopher Philodemus, writing about the sources of joy in life, music and food and friendship. Voice from the ashes, a thought preserved by the very heat that should have destroyed it. This is not just about recovering lost texts. The resilience of ideas. The people of these cities died, but their thoughts, their debates, their musings on what makes life worth living are fighting their way back to us through the combined power of human curiosity and machine intelligence. Only read a few columns. There are hundreds of scrolls waiting, where the story of Pompeii takes its final, breathtaking turn. All these discoveries, from the chariot to the DNA to the unrolled scrolls, come from a startling fact. Only excavated about 40% of Pompeii. 60% of the city, an entire urban landscape, still lies buried under the hardened ash. The majority of Pompeii's secrets are still underground, waiting. Every time archaeologists break ground in a new area, they know they might find something that rewrites the history books. Temple, an unknown form of art, a record office with wax tablets detailing the city's entire economy. The potential is limitless, the enduring mystery and the burning promise of Pompeii. The eruption, did not just freeze a city in time. Perfect time capsule, layer upon layer, and we have only opened the first few. So what does this mean for us today, at this catastrophe from the safety of 2 millennia? Pompeii teaches us that civilizations are not permanent. They are fragile constructs of stone, and law and custom can be erased in a single day by forces beyond our control. The wealthy man and his slave died together. The philosopher's scroll and the fast food snack were buried by the same event. Shows us the entire spectrum of human experience, from the sublime to the mundane, and it reminds us that it can all vanish. But a terrible twist, the eruption that killed also immortalized, a form of eternity that no pyramid or monument ever could. It gave us a true slice of life, with all its contradictions intact. So as we walk these streets now, we are not just tourists in a ruin. We are witnesses to a day that never ended. We are looking into a mirror. The people of Pompeii were not so different from us. They worked, they argued, they dreamed of a better future. They built a society of incredible sophistication and brutal inequality, art and poetry, and they exploited the weak. They lived in the shadow of a mountain they did not understand. The ultimate price is a warning, but it is also a gift. It is a gift of perspective. What we are building and what will remain of us when our own hour comes. Will we be remembered by our chariots of celebration, or by the grinding mills of our forgotten children, is not yet written. Pompeii's final lesson is that time is the ultimate archaeologist through the layers of our world, and it will reveal the truth of who we were. The city frozen in time is not just a relic of the past, for the future. And somewhere in that still, buried earth, another voice is waiting to be heard, to tell us something new about ourselves is not over. The conversation has just begun.